Hey everyone, so glad you could join us tonight. There's just something about this time of year, right? It's that cozy, thankful vibe, and I can't wait to share some incredible stories with you. People are going to open up about how faith, perseverance, and a little bit of hope have shaped their lives. And honestly, some of these stories are just mind-blowing. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive into some real, heartfelt testimonies of gratitude and God's amazing work in people's lives. Okay, so let's take a little journey back in time, like way back to the early 1600s. Imagine England back then, lots of strict rules about religion. You know, if you didn't belong to the Church of England, basically the state church, you were kind of out of luck. You couldn't worship freely, and that was a big deal for a lot of people. Among them were groups called Puritans and Separatists. These were folks who really wanted their faith to come from the heart, not because some law told them to. They weren't into the idea of a state religion forcing anyone to worship in a certain way, so they were determined to find somewhere they could practice freely. So around 1608, some of these Puritans and Separatists decided, you know what, we can't stay in England. They headed to Holland, which had more religious freedom at the time. It wasn't perfect far from it, but at least they could worship openly without fear of breaking the law. But Holland came with its own challenges. There was a lot of moral and cultural decadence they didn't like, and after a dozen years, they started thinking, okay, we need to find a better place for our kids. Somewhere we can raise them with our values intact. I mean, can you imagine trying to raise kids in a culture you don't really connect with? Yeah, it was tough for them. So, in 1620, they made the big move. They set sail on the Mayflower 102 passengers, plus, fun fact, 2 dogs. And they were heading for a brand new world, aiming for Virginia initially. But here's the twist, nature had other plans. The Atlantic was rough, with storms and gale-force winds tossing that little ship all over the place. They couldn't make it to their intended landing, so instead they ended up in Plymouth, Massachusetts. That's where they decided to establish their colony, and honestly, it's kind of poetic when you think about it being blown off course, landing somewhere completely different and starting fresh. Before they even set foot on land, though, they realized they needed some rules. So they drafted what became known as the Mayflower Compact. And here's the thing, it wasn't just a legal document, it was also a spiritual pledge. They were promising God and each other that they'd work together for the good of the colony. The wording is formal and old-fashioned, but it basically says they were coming for the glory of God to advance their faith and to honor their king and country. They agreed to form a civil body politic, to create fair laws, and to submit to those laws together. It's like their way of saying, hey, we're in this together, and we want to do right by God and each other. And they signed it on November 11th, 1620, right there at Cape Cod. Imagine that moment cold, maybe windy, but filled with hope and determination. The voyage itself took 65 days cramped together on a tiny ship, facing the unknown, battling seasickness, storms, and uncertainty. That's tough, right? But those 102 settlers, those first seeds of what would become American history, finally made it. And then the very next year, in 1621, something really beautiful happened. Contrary to some of the history books that get a bit twisted, the Pilgrims didn't just land and immediately feast. They actually came together with the Native Americans, primarily from the Wampanoag tribe, to give thanks to God for a successful harvest. It was the first Thanksgiving. 2 very different groups of people who had both been through immense challenges, one group weary from travel and the other dealing with their own hardships, came together around a table to celebrate life, survival, and God's provision. It was a moment of unity, gratitude, and reflection, and it set the tone for what Thanksgiving would symbolize for generations. Now, think about this for a second. These people weren't wealthy, they weren't powerful, and they certainly didn't have modern conveniences. They had just survived a brutal voyage across the Atlantic, faced harsh conditions, and were building a colony from scratch. And still, they took the time to pause, reflect, and give thanks. That's kind of incredible, right? They documented it. Too, William Bradford, one of the leaders, kept a journal called of Plymouth Plantation. That's how we know the details today. Not some revisionist story, but actual first-hand accounts of what happened. And here's something I find fascinating. Their faith was central to everything. They weren't just thanking God for a good harvest, they were acknowledging His guidance, protection, and providence throughout every struggle they had faced. The Mayflower Compact, that journey, the first Thanksgiving, all of it was steeped in a sense of divine purpose. It wasn't just survival, it was a living testament to faith in action. And here we are, 400 years later, still reflecting on that moment, still giving thanks for life, for community, for provision, and yes, for faith that sustains us through difficult times. So, to recap a little, we've got these Puritans and separatists leaving England to Holland for religious freedom. They stay there for 12 years, but the culture and decadence prompt them to seek a new land. They sail on the Mayflower in 1620, facing a harrowing 65-day journey. Storms push them off course to Plymouth, Massachusetts, where they land and establish a colony. Before disembarking fully, they signed the Mayflower Compact, promising God and each other to create fair laws and live in community. And then, in 1621, they joined with the Wampanoag tribe for the first Thanksgiving, giving thanks to God together, celebrating survival, faith, and a new beginning. And here's the weird part, or at least what I find really interesting, this first Thanksgiving wasn't just about food and feasting, it was a spiritual and cultural moment. Two groups of people with very different backgrounds and experiences coming together, navigating differences and choosing gratitude over fear, unity over division. That's actually a pretty radical idea when you think about it. And it set the stage for a tradition that would echo for 400 years. Family, community, reflection, and giving thanks, all wrapped together. It's amazing how these early decisions and acts of faith have shaped a part of our cultural and spiritual heritage even today. And while some of the details get lost or reinterpreted over time, the essence remains. It wasn't about just surviving, it was about acknowledging a higher purpose, building relationships, and creating a foundation of gratitude and faith. And that's why, every Thanksgiving, when people gather, even if they're not aware of all the historical nuances, they are participating in a tradition that started with courage, faith, and a deep sense of thankfulness. So yeah, the story of Thanksgiving is a mix of adventure, struggle, faith, and community. It's a reminder that even when things are uncertain, even when the journey is hard and the destination is unknown, people can come together, support each other, and give thanks for what they have. And that's exactly the kind of mindset that set the tone for these early settlers and continues to inspire gratitude and reflection in all of us today. Alright, so let me tell you about Tammy Matson's story. It's one of those testimonies that really grabs you because it's so human, and yet it has this incredible miraculous element. So Tammy, she's a mom of 4, and let me just say, she's tough. Like, she has a seriously high pain threshold, but late in 2020, she started experiencing this back pain like, not just normal aches, but something that was truly debilitating. Her lower back and right leg were hurting so badly that at one point, she couldn't even walk back to the house from a simple outing. And you know, for someone like her who's used to pushing through pain, this was a red flag that something was seriously wrong. At first, Tammy tried to manage it the usual ways: acupuncture, chiropractic visits, physical therapy, walking to strengthen herself. She was doing everything she could to just get a handle on this pain because, honestly, it was relentless. But nothing seemed to work. One day, she literally called her husband on the phone in tears because she wasn't sure she could even make it back home. That's when it hit. They needed professional medical help immediately. So off to the doctor they went, and the doctor recommended seeing an orthopedic surgeon. Next came x-rays and an MRI. And that's when they got the news there was a massive cyst on her lower vertebrae, and it was pressing on a nerve, affecting her right leg. To make matters more complicated, she also had degenerative discs in her lower back. The surgeon laid out the planned surgery to remove the cyst and fuse the lower vertebrae to prevent further pain. But, of course, life had more twists in store. Tammy fell on the ice, breaking her left leg. So suddenly, the surgery had to be postponed because she couldn't even walk properly to rehab after the surgery. It was a frustrating setback. They knew the surgery was necessary. But now they had to wait. And let's be real, thinking about major back surgery is scary for anyone. There are so many potential long-term complications and pain issues afterward. But at this point, it wasn't like they had much choice, so they looked for guidance from God. And Tammy's husband remembered James 5:14, which talks about calling the elders of the church to pray over the sick and anoint them with oil. He wanted God's direction, not just healing, but clarity on the right path for Tammy's health and her future. They reached out to Pastor Mike Emerson, who helped arrange a time of prayer with Pastor Jimmy O'Keefe as well. On March 14th, Tammy was anointed with oil and prayers were lifted up for her healing. At first, nothing seemed to change. Tammy didn't feel anything immediately, which can be discouraging, right? You hear about miraculous healing and hope for a sign, but sometimes it's not instant. For her, the change was gradual. Slowly, over a couple of months, her pain started easing bit by bit. The improvement was almost imperceptible at first, but then it became undeniable. When she went back to the surgeon, she requested another MRI just to confirm what she already suspected, that something incredible was happening. And here's where it gets truly amazing. The doctor looked at the new MRI, compared it to the one from December, and he was stunned. The massive cyst that had caused so much pain and required surgical intervention was completely gone. He'd never seen anything like it in his career. I mean, this is a doctor who's been looking at MRIs for years. He said he's never seen a synovial cyst of that size just disappear. 2 MR is side by side, and one had simply vanished. And it wasn't just gone a little, it was completely gone. No trace. The relief and awe in that moment had to be overwhelming. For Tammy and her family, it was confirmation not just of physical healing, but of the power of faith and prayer. What makes this story so relatable and emotional is the journey itself. Tammy didn't just walk in and get instantly healed. She went through intense pain, frustration, setbacks, and uncertainty. She pushed through medical treatments that didn't help. She waited patiently during her surgery delay, and she leaned into her faith. The gradual nature of the healing made the final outcome all the more powerful. It wasn't a magic trick. It was a testament to perseverance, trust, and divine intervention. The emotional roller coaster of this story is palpable. You can imagine the stress of being a mother in pain, not knowing if she'd regain mobility, not knowing if the surgery would even be possible. The moments of fear, the uncertainty, the moments where you're hoping but not seeing anything yet, that's where the faith aspect becomes so compelling. Tammy and her husband didn't just hope blindly, they actively sought guidance. They prayed, they leaned on their church community, and they held onto scripture. And then, gradually, over 2 months, the miraculous healing unfolded. The doctor, a professional who sees hundreds of cases, confirmed what they already felt in their hearts: the cyst was gone. What's also amazing is how this story emphasizes the process of faith. It wasn't just about asking for a quick fix or expecting an immediate miracle. It was about committing to prayer, holding on to hope through incremental changes, and trusting that the outcome was in God's hands. Every step, from the excruciating pain to the delayed surgery, to the prayers and anointing, to the slow recovery, was part of a journey that required patience, faith, and resilience. And when the final confirmation came, it wasn't just medical evidence. It was a profound spiritual affirmation of their trust in God's timing and plan. The human element here is so strong, too. Tammy is a mom, a wife, someone who's used to taking care of others. And suddenly she's the one who needs care, patience, and attention. Her husband's role in supporting her, seeking prayer, and documenting the journey adds another layer of connection for viewers. It's easy to imagine oneself or a loved one in this situation: the fear, the uncertainty, the desire for a sign, and it makes the eventual miracle all the more inspiring. The story captures that tension perfectly. You're rooting for her, holding your breath with each setback, and then you get that payoff: the cyst is gone, confirmed by a professional, and the pain that once felt insurmountable is lifted. Another thing that really stands out is how the story bridges the personal and the universal, and while it's Tammy's specific experience, the themes of hope, resilience, faith, and healing are universal. Everyone has faced a moment where they felt trapped by circumstances, where the path forward seems blocked. Seeing someone navigate that and ultimately experience something extraordinary is powerful. It reminds viewers that even in the most challenging situations, faith, persistence, and community support can lead to outcomes beyond what we might expect. Tammy's testimony also highlights the integration of medical science and faith. She didn't ignore her medical needs. She sought doctors, MRs, and professional advice, but she also brought prayer, scripture, and anointing into the process. The result isn't portrayed as a rejection of medicine, but as a partnership between professional care and spiritual guidance. That balance adds credibility to the story, showing that faith doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means approaching challenges with trust, seeking help, and remaining open to extraordinary outcomes. The suspense in this story is key to keeping it engaging. From the intense pain that threatens daily life, to the uncertainty of surgery, to the delayed procedures due to a broken leg, to the initial lack of noticeable improvement after prayer, the audience is kept on edge. Then the reveal the cyst completely disappears is the climax, and it's delivered with the weight of medical confirmation. That tension, the highs and lows, the emotional beats, make it feel like you're experiencing it alongside Tammy and her family. Finally, the story ends with a deep sense of awe and gratitude. It's not just that the cyst disappeared, it's the combination of physical relief, emotional release, and spiritual affirmation that makes the testimony so moving. Tammy and her husband can look back on the journey, recognize the moments of doubt and fear, and see how each step was guided and supported. It's a reminder of the power of perseverance, the importance of community, and the potential for miraculous outcomes when faith is combined with action and patience. So, wrapping up Tammy's story in a natural, conversational way, imagine facing pain so intense that it stops your daily life, feeling the frustration of delays and setbacks, seeking guidance and prayer, and slowly seeing improvement until, finally, the impossible happens. The cyst that caused so much suffering is completely gone, confirmed by a doctor who had never seen anything like it. It's awe-inspiring, emotional, and deeply human, showing how faith, resilience, and community support can intersect to create truly miraculous results. And that, honestly, is what makes this testimony unforgettable. It's not just a story of healing, it's a story of hope, trust, and the incredible outcomes that can come from believing and persevering even when the path forward feels uncertain. Alright, let's dive into Fred Avila's story. It's intense, emotional, and honestly, a real roller coaster of faith, pain, and miraculous recovery. So, Fred's journey begins with a condition called trigeminal neuralgia, or TN for short. Now, TN isn't just your typical pain, it's sometimes called the suicide disease because it causes these lightning bolt-like jolts of pain in the face that are so intense. People have been driven to extreme measures to escape it, and Fred experienced this on both sides of his face. The pain is relentless, doesn't respond well to ordinary pain meds, and messes with your life in 100 ways at once: sleep, focus, mood, daily tasks. Imagine trying to be a husband, a father, a worker, all while your face is being hit by these jolts of nerve pain that feel like electricity shooting through your skull. Fred's early encounters with TN weren't just physical, they were spiritual too, in a way. Before he became a believer, he didn't really understand God's presence in his life, and at one point, he thought maybe he was being punished. That's something a lot of us can relate to, right? When suffering hits, we start asking questions and sometimes misinterpret what's happening. But he went through his first neurosurgery at 23. This surgery involved opening his skull behind his ear so the surgeon could access the brainstem and decompress the blood vessels pressing on the nerve. Terrifying, right? But here's the thing: after that surgery, his left side was pain-free, he experienced relief, and that was the beginning of a long journey that would test both his faith and his endurance. But the story doesn't stop there. TN is persistent, and in 2004, the right side of his face started experiencing those jolts again. The pain returned, worse this time, and it threw his life into upheaval. He had to undergo a second surgery in 2009. Now, by this point, Fred had become a born-again Christian, having committed his life to Jesus in 2008. This changed everything for him. Suddenly, he wasn't just facing surgery as a terrified patient, he was walking through it with a spiritual anchor, leaning into God's promises, his life verse. Isaiah 41:10 became his mantra, "Do not fear. For I am with you, do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." He recited it over and over leading up to surgery. And when he woke up, the right side of his face was free from TN pain. Imagine that relief after years of suffering. Fast forward to 2015, and the TN pain came back again on the right side. Now, for anyone else, this might have been crushing. But Fred made a conscious choice. He decided to trust God rather than fall into bitterness or resentment. He held onto the truth that suffering, while painful, could have purpose. That God's grace is sufficient, and that when we are weak, God's strength is made perfect. It's such a profound perspective shift to see pain not just as an obstacle, but as an opportunity to lean deeper into faith. Then came December 17th, 2020, Fred had his third brain surgery. This one took place in California, near his boyhood home, with a top neurosurgeon specializing in his condition. The surgery lasted 4 hours, a major procedure that would be difficult for anyone physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Afterward, he woke up from anesthesia, aware that the pain which had plagued him for years was gone. Relief, gratitude, and awe must have washed over him. And yet, as intense as the surgery was, Fred's journey was far from over. You see, the night before his surgery, he was unknowingly exposed to COVID-19 by his wife, who didn't realize she was infected. At first, the virus didn't register in him. Tests came back negative due to the incubation period. He went home, started recovery, thinking he was safe. But soon after, he developed symptoms. And by Christmas Eve, 2020, he tested positive. COVID struck him hard, complicated by his recent surgery and pre-existing conditions like chronic lung disease and asthma. Suddenly, he wasn't just recovering from a complex brain surgery, he was battling a virus that threatened his breathing and his life. His symptoms escalated quickly. He became bedbound, struggling with high fever, shallow breathing, and extreme fatigue. Oxygen levels, measured by a pulse oximeter, dropped dangerously low. Within a few days, he had to go to the hospital, but even that was complicated. Initially, his vitals weren't deemed critical enough, and he was told to go home. Meanwhile, COVID was spreading through his family, his condition worsened, and just 2 days later, he returned to the hospital with oxygen saturation levels down to 84, a frightening level for anyone, especially someone just out of major surgery. He was diagnosed with acute respiratory failure, hypoxia, and COVID-induced pneumonia. It was a dire situation. Fred's narrative here is filled with suspense and tension. Imagine being in a hospital, struggling to breathe, alarms going off, being on high-flow oxygen while doctors worry about your survival. At one point, his wife was informed that if he survived, he might be on supplemental oxygen for months. It's a moment that would terrify anyone. And yet, in the midst of this, Fred turned to God. He and his wife prayed together over the phone, reciting Psalm 23. He describes this as the moment when his condition began to improve. It's powerful to see the connection between faith and hope manifesting so clearly in a physical, life-threatening situation. As he improved, his oxygen support was gradually reduced. He began breathing on his own again. The pneumonia receded, and over 8 days, he went from acute respiratory failure to being able to leave the hospital without any oxygen tank. The relief and gratitude he felt must have been overwhelming. But there's another layer here. Fred wasn't just physically healed. He experienced the emotional and spiritual support of an entire community. Friends, family, church members, and even neighbors were interceding for him through prayer, fasting, and practical support like meals. This massive web of care added to the miracle, creating a tangible sense of being lifted and carried through impossible circumstances. And then, just when you think it's over, life threw in a little extra blessing. While Fred was on disability recovering, he received a call from the CFO of his company offering him a promotion. That's like the cherry on top after surviving TN brain surgeries and a near-death experience with COVID. Not only did he recover physically and spiritually, but his professional life also took a positive turn. It's the kind of moment that leaves you breathless, really, because it's so unexpected yet so fitting after the intensity of what he endured. Fred's story is remarkable not just for the miraculous healings and medical recoveries, but for the emotional journey, the highs and lows, the moments of terror and doubt, the moments of deep gratitude and awe. From the excruciating TN pain, multiple surgeries, and life-threatening COVID complications to the prayers, community support, and ultimate healing and promotion. It's a narrative that grips you. It's also deeply human. He experiences fear. He experiences pain, he experiences doubt, but he also experiences faith, hope, and resilience. The story captures the tension between human vulnerability and divine intervention, making the miraculous outcomes even more impactful. Another thing that stands out in Fred's testimony is how it shows the interplay between physical healing and spiritual faith. He didn't simply pray and expect everything to magically resolve. He actively engaged with medical care, surgeries, and professional treatment while simultaneously leaning into faith, prayer, and community support. This combination reinforces the message that miracles can work alongside human action. And the result, complete healing from TN pain, survival and recovery from COVID-induced pneumonia, and a renewed sense of life purpose and gratitude. The story also highlights the power of communal support. It's one thing to face trials alone, but Fred had his wife, his family, his church, and even neighbors and colleagues advocating for him, praying, and providing tangible support. The collective faith and care amplified the personal faith he held, showing how human connection and divine intervention can intertwine to produce extraordinary outcomes. The narrative of people walking prayer circles, fasting, sending meals, and praying remotely adds an emotional depth and shows how love and support can tangibly impact healing. Fred's journey is also a lesson in perseverance. Over decades, he dealt with TN, endured multiple brain surgeries, and faced the life-threatening COVID infection. Each phase tested him physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Yet through all these trials, he leaned into his faith, sought God's guidance, and trusted that there was a purpose behind each challenge. And the suspense throughout the story, the near-death moments with COVID, the ICU alarms, the uncertainty about survival keeps listeners on edge, making the eventual outcome feel triumphant and deeply satisfying. What's inspiring is how Fred frames the experience. He doesn't just celebrate survival or a promotion, he reflects on the lessons learned, the grace he experienced, and the power of God working through his suffering. He acknowledges that not every story ends the same way, and yet he emphasizes that God's presence, sovereignty, and love remain constant. This perspective is both comforting and empowering, encouraging listeners to find hope and faith in their own struggles, no matter how dire the circumstances. In sum, Fred Avila's testimony is a compelling human story filled with suspense, emotional highs and lows, and profound gratitude. It covers his early struggles with TN, the multiple brain surgeries, becoming a born-again Christian, the COVID-19 ordeal, acute respiratory failure, and miraculous recovery. Along the way, it showcases the power of prayer, community support, perseverance, and faith. And finally, it ends with hope, gratitude, and even unexpected professional blessings, leaving viewers inspired and awed by both the human spirit and divine intervention. It's a story that captures the depth of suffering, the resilience of faith, and the extraordinary outcomes that can come when hope, prayer, and action intersect. Okay? So Tony Stevens' story is one that really grabs you because it's raw, real, and human. He grew up in a very religious household. Both his parents were deeply involved in church. His mom, especially, had him and his siblings in vacation Bible school constantly and attending church every Sunday. So on the outside, it looked like he was living a faithful life, right? But here's the thing, Tony didn't actually have a personal relationship with Christ at that point. He thought he did, just following the routine, doing what was expected as a kid, but there wasn't that deep personal connection that comes from your own faith. As he got older, especially in his teens and high school years, he started drifting away from the church. He began questioning things, feeling disconnected, and like a lot of teens, he went down the path of skepticism and distance from faith. It wasn't that he was angry or spiteful, it was more like he was trying to make sense of a world that sometimes felt harsh, confusing, and full of contradictions. He started thinking, if I can't touch it, see it, or feel it, how could I believe it? That's the mindset he had at the time, which is really relatable for anyone who's been wrestling with faith in a tangible way. Then, something really intense happened that would completely shift his perspective on life. Tony was working as a firearms instructor, and one day a client came in who was acting oddly. During the session, Tony noticed the guy muttering under his breath and behaving strangely. And then, suddenly, the client pulled the gun he was using off the bench and pointed it at himself. There was no time to think, no room for hesitation. Tony had to react instinctively. He jumped on the guy, struggling to wrestle the gun away, and in the chaos, the gun went off. The client ended up shooting himself. That moment, instant, shocking, and terrifying, hit Tony like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just about the immediate danger, it was a wake-up call. He realized in an instant how fragile life is, how quickly it can end, and how easily he could have been in the same situation. The weight of that realization stuck with him. After that traumatic incident, Tony's life spiraled into a darker period. For nearly a year, he developed aggressive substance abuse habits, turning to drugs and alcohol to cope, to numb the weight of what he'd experienced, to try to fill a void that he couldn't handle on his own. It was a dark time, a period of real struggle and self-destruction, and it pushed him to a point where he knew he couldn't continue on that path. He hit a wall, both physically and emotionally. And that's often how it happens, right? You reach a point where the pain of staying the same is greater than the fear of change. In that moment, Tony did something he hadn't really done before he prayed. And it wasn't this long, a formal prayer, it was just him. Honestly, reaching out, saying, hey, if you're up there, give me a sign. I can't do this on my own. I need something to hold on to. It was simple, desperate, and raw. And what's amazing is that after that week, he talked to his mom and asked if he could go to church with her. That was the first time he really connected with the community in a meaningful way. And it was during that visit that he heard a pastor speak about God loving you even through the valleys and mountains of life. That message hit him exactly where he needed it. It was a turning point, the moment where he started to see that there was hope, that faith could actually be personal, real, and transformative. From there, things started to shift. He found a community of young adults at church and became involved with them, which provided support, guidance, and a safe space to explore his faith. Tony started attending regularly, growing in understanding, and finally, on July 19th, 2021, he accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. The moment was powerful. He described it as standing there, feeling God's presence, and realizing that he couldn't deny what he was experiencing. His life changed dramatically after that. He felt a newfound purpose, a deep sense of gratitude, and a clear direction he hadn't had before. The experience gave him a fresh start, a way to leave behind the darkness and the substance abuse, and step into a life built on faith, hope, and intentional living. What makes Tony's story so compelling is the emotional journey. You can feel the tension of his early skepticism, the shock and trauma of that near-tragic incident, the chaos of the year-long struggle with substances, and then the gradual, almost hesitant opening to faith. And then bam, the turning point, the raw human emotion in his first prayer, the connection with his mom and the church, and finally, that transformative moment of accepting Jesus. You can hear it in the story, the fear, the doubt, the relief, and then the joy and purpose that follow. It's a narrative that's deeply relatable because it captures the messy, unpredictable, and often painful path of personal transformation. Tony's journey is a perfect example of how trauma and challenges can become catalysts for change. The near-death experience of the client at the range, combined with the weight of guilt and fear, forced him to confront his life and the choices he was making. It pushed him to a breaking point where he realized he couldn't navigate the pain and chaos on his own. That realization, raw and humbling, opened the door for prayer, reflection, and eventually faith. And that's the beauty of it sometimes. It takes hitting that low point for someone to truly look up and reach out for help, and that reaching out can be transformative. Another thing that stands out in Tony's story is the authenticity of his journey. He didn't pretend it was easy, he didn't sugarcoat the struggle, and he didn't present a neat, linear path to faith. There was real pain, real mistakes, real confusion, but that's what makes the eventual turning point so powerful. When he finally prays, when he finally attends church, and when he finally accepts Jesus, it's not just a symbolic moment, it's a deep, visceral experience that changes how he sees life, relationships, and himself. The emotion is palpable, and it makes the testimony feel genuine and relatable. And let's not forget the role of community in this story. Tony didn't navigate the path to faith entirely alone. His mom, the church community, and the young adult group provided support, encouragement, and guidance. That human connection, combined with his own personal effort and openness to change, created an environment where transformation was possible. It's a reminder that while personal faith is individual, the journey is often enriched by the people and community around us. It's not just about the moment of conversion, it's about the ongoing support and growth that follow. Finally, the impact of Tony's turning point is clear. He describes it as a complete life change. The substance abuse ended, the sense of despair lifted, and a deep, abiding purpose emerged. He gained clarity, peace, and a relationship with God that guides him through life's challenges. The gratitude he feels is tangible in the way he shares his story. He's not just recounting events. He's reflecting on the transformation, the hope, and the joy that comes from finally finding a path that aligns with his values, beliefs, and sense of self. So, summarizing Tony Stevens' journey, he starts in a religious environment without a personal connection to faith, drifts away during his teens, and faces a traumatic, near-death incident at work that shakes his perspective. This leads to a dark period of substance abuse and struggle, culminating in a heartfelt, raw prayer for guidance. He reconnects with his mom and attends church, finds a supportive community, and experiences a profound turning point, ultimately accepting Jesus Christ and embracing a life of faith, gratitude, and purpose. The story is emotional, suspenseful, and deeply human, capturing the transformation from despair to hope and the power of a personally lived faith. Alright, so Vishon Hook and his wife, Frisa Nadiak, have a story that's just full of faith, perseverance, and God's provision. Vishon's journey starts way back in his childhood in Pakistan. He was born into a Christian family. His father was a Presbyterian pastor, deeply committed to ministry, and Vishon grew up surrounded by faith. But early on, Vishon faced a serious health challenge. When he was about 7 or 8, he got very sick, and the illness severely damaged one of his kidneys. Back then, in Pakistan, medical options were limited, and most doctors weren't willing to take his case because it was risky. His parents were desperate, and understandably so. But here's where faith enters in a really profound way. Vishon's parents decided to dedicate him to God, believing that if they entrusted his life to the Lord, a miracle could happen. They promised God that if he saved their son, they would raise him to serve him. Shortly after that, one of Vishon's uncles, who was a medical specialist, found a surgeon willing to take the case. The surgeon warned them that it was critical and that they couldn't promise outcomes, but they went ahead anyway. Wait, shit, and this is the amazing part. Vishon underwent surgery, which lasted several hours, and miraculously, he didn't need a single blood transfusion. Doctors expected him to require multiple, but by God's provision, it wasn't necessary. The surgery was successful, and Vishon survived and thrived as a child. You can't help but feel the awe in that moment, knowing that his life was truly spared through divine intervention. Growing up, Vishon remained active in the church. He pursued ministry, studying at a seminary, and eventually serving in the same church as his father. But life wasn't without challenges. He started to feel the pull of worldly pressures. Many of his friends were earning far more money than he was in ministry, and he struggled with feelings of inadequacy and distraction. This led him to step away from full-time ministry for a period, working in a call center and facing a period of detours and uncertainty about his purpose. Even someone raised in faith, trained for ministry, and committed to God can experience seasons of doubt and struggle. Then Vishon moved to the United States, where he and Frisa settled and got married. Their journey of faith continued, But there was a longing for more, a desire to expand their family, to experience the blessing of children. They began attending a church community that they had been introduced to by family members. Through prayer and consistent guidance from their pastors, they sought God's direction and blessing for a child. They committed to praying together regularly, holding hands, and making it part of their shared spiritual practice, even on days they were tired or discouraged. Their dedication and persistence in prayer exemplify how faith is often a daily practice, requiring consistency, hope, and trust even when results aren't immediately visible. And then, as a testament to their faith and perseverance, God answered. Frisa became pregnant, and they were blessed with a son, Zuriel. The joy and gratitude they felt were enormous, not just because of the birth of their child, but because it was the culmination of years of prayer, trust, and unwavering faith. It was a tangible sign of God's provision, showing that He had been present throughout Vishan's life, from childhood illness to adult struggles, from detours in ministry to the blessing of a family. It's one of those moments where you can't help but reflect on the faithfulness of God, how He can take trials and transform them into blessings. What makes their story so compelling is the continuity of faith and trust over a lifetime. From Vishan's parents dedicating him as a child, to his miraculous surgery, to the challenges of ministry, detours, and eventual settlement in the USA, the thread that runs through the story is persistent faith and reliance on God's provision. Each step, even the difficult ones, was part of a larger picture that culminated in joy, purpose, and blessing. It's also a story that highlights the importance of prayer and community support, the consistent encouragement from pastors, the shared prayers between Vishan and Frisa, and the broader church community's involvement in guiding and supporting them were crucial. Faith isn't just an individual journey, it's often communal, with the support, wisdom, and encouragement of others helping to navigate challenges and discern God's will. Vishan and Frisa's testimony also emphasizes the interplay of patience and perseverance in faith. The path to blessing wasn't immediate. It was filled with waiting, uncertainty, and trust. Their commitment to regular prayer, to holding fast to faith even when outcomes weren't clear, shows that God's timing is often different from our own, and that persistent faith can lead to profound results. The arrival of their son was the tangible fulfillment of years of hope and prayer, a reminder that God sees and honors consistent faith and devotion. Their story is deeply human, relatable, and inspiring. It shows that even with early life challenges, detours, doubts, and struggles, faith can guide you through, providing strength, purpose, and eventually incredible blessings. Vishan's survival and thriving after childhood illness, his perseverance through ministry challenges, and the answered prayers for a child all highlight a life shaped by reliance on God and an enduring commitment to His will. The narrative also resonates on a personal level because it captures both the ordinary and extraordinary moments. Ordinary in the sense of daily prayers, attending church, navigating life and work challenges, and extraordinary in the miraculous interventions from a critical surgery as a child without needing blood transfusions to the blessing of a family after dedicated prayer. It's this balance of everyday faith practices and remarkable outcomes that makes their testimony both inspiring and accessible. So, summarizing Vishan Huk and Frisa Nadiak's journey, it begins with a life-threatening childhood illness and a miraculous surgical recovery, continues through early life and ministry, detours and challenges that tested faith, relocation and integration into a new church community in the USA, persistent prayer for a child, and culminates in the blessing of their son, Zuriel. Their story is a powerful reminder of God's faithfulness, the importance of perseverance in prayer, and the fulfillment that comes from trusting in divine timing. It's a deeply human and engaging narrative that captures the highs and lows of life and highlights the transformative power of faith and God's provision. Alright, so Oliver Hunsucker and his wife Christine have a story that's really intense and full of suspense, and it really shows the power of faith and prayer in the most critical moments. It all started on January 1st, 2020. Oliver had gone to bed early, feeling fatigued from the weekend, and nobody could have predicted what was coming next. In the middle of the night, Christine found him unresponsive. She immediately called 911 and the emergency response was crucial. They were able to get help within minutes. This quick action likely saved his life. Oliver had suffered a brain aneurysm, a ruptured vessel in his brain, which is often fatal. He was rushed to a local hospital where initial tests confirmed the severity of the situation. From there, he was transferred to a Tier 1 trauma hospital for specialized neurosurgery. The doctors were ready, and Oliver underwent a brain angiogram and then surgery, a complex procedure where a pipeline stent was placed into the ruptured location in his brain through the carotid artery. The surgery was successful, but the journey wasn't over. After the operation, Oliver spent weeks in the ICU and neuro recovery ward. He didn't regain consciousness for 10 to 12 days, and during this time, Christine was right there by his side, praying, staying vigilant, and trusting God for his recovery. The emotional toll was enormous, being awake and aware of the severity of the situation, watching him unconscious, and knowing the risks involved. Every day was tense, filled with hope, fear, and prayer. While Oliver was in the ICU, Christine had to manage everything around him, including coordinating with medical staff, keeping in touch with family, and holding on to her faith through the uncertainty. Psalm 23 and Isaiah 41:10 became her anchors, repeating verses in prayer and trusting God to guide and protect them through this life-threatening ordeal. The tension was palpable. Every medical update brought a mix of relief and fear, and every small sign of progress felt like a victory. Oliver's recovery was slow and painstaking. He experienced forced insomnia for weeks to prevent complications like vasospasms or stroke. Chronic pain from blood and swelling in his brain added to the challenges, and he needed rehabilitation to regain physical strength and mobility. Through it all, Christine's consistent presence, prayer, and faith were a critical support. She encouraged him, prayed with him, and remained steadfast, showing how faith and love worked together in crisis. As days turned into weeks, small milestones became monumental. The first movement of a toe, responding to her voice, and other subtle signs of awareness were moments of joy and reassurance. It wasn't just about physical healing, it was about hope, reassurance, and the evidence that God's hand was at work. Prayer from friends, family, church members, and the community enveloped them, adding a sense of collective faith supporting the recovery. Slowly, Oliver regained consciousness, strength, and the ability to function again. Rehabilitation helped him rebuild stamina, and through patience, persistence, and faith, he gradually returned to health. Christine's faith never wavered, and her prayers, combined with community support, became a vital part of the healing process. This period highlighted not just medical expertise, but the power of spiritual resilience, community, and unwavering hope. In the end, Oliver's story is a powerful testament to survival, faith, and the human spirit. From the critical moments of the aneurysm, emergency response, and surgery, through the ICU recovery and rehabilitation, to the gradual regaining of health, the story shows how faith and prayer play a central role in navigating life-threatening challenges. The narrative is full of suspense, emotional highs and lows, and human vulnerability, ultimately culminating in hope, healing, and gratitude. It's a story that demonstrates the profound impact of faith, the support of loved ones, and the incredible resilience of the human body and spirit. Alright, so Aiden Herrera's story is really relatable and honestly, kind of heartwarming. He grew up in a split household. His dad went to church regularly, but his mom didn't go as often, though she was still a believer. So, from the start, Aiden was navigating this tension, two different approaches to faith under one roof. Even though he attended church, he wasn't fully invested. He was trying to figure out for himself what faith meant, and he often felt caught between different expectations and perspectives. As a kid, he sometimes struggled with feeling out of place. Friends would question why he went to church, and that made him self-conscious, unsure about how to engage with faith while also fitting in socially. Growing up in that environment, he developed this sort of tentative approach to God he wanted to believe, but he wasn't ready to take any bold steps. And that's where the transformative experience starts. Aiden's turning point came during a retreat, one of those intense, immersive church experiences where the focus is on worship, reflection, and personal decisions. At first, he hesitated to respond when the speaker made a call to the altar. He didn't want to be singled out, didn't want to stand up in front of everyone, and honestly, he was nervous about what it would mean. But inside, he felt this overwhelming urge, a nudge that he couldn't ignore. It was this inner pull that something important was happening, something that required him to step forward. And even though he initially held back, that feeling didn't go away. By the next day, Aiden found himself in the front row during the evening service. His friends had already gone up, and in the flow of the crowd and worship, he got pushed forward. It was kind of awkward at first, but in that moment, he realized that this was his chance, the opportunity to respond to what God was calling him to do. He raised his hands, joined in worship, and started singing. And even though it felt unexpected and a little uncomfortable at first, he experienced something profound. He felt a strong, undeniable sense of God's presence, different from anything he had felt before. It was overwhelming and transformative. After that, he had a chance to talk to a leader who helped guide him in prayer. That's when Aiden made the conscious decision to accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior. It wasn't just a reaction to the moment, it was a genuine, heartfelt choice to follow God and let his guidance shape his life going forward. And from that point on, everything started to shift. His perspective on faith changed completely. What had been abstract, something he wasn't sure he could believe, became personal and real. He had a relationship with God that was no longer about attending church out of habit, but about actively trusting and following him. What's really compelling about Aiden's story is how relatable it is. So many people experience that tension growing up, trying to understand faith on your own, feeling unsure or hesitant, not wanting to stand out or make a public commitment until you're ready. His journey captures the human side of faith: doubt, hesitation, curiosity, and finally, a moment of surrender that leads to transformation. It's not instant or perfect, it's messy, natural, and deeply personal. Aiden's experience at the retreat highlights the power of community and environment in shaping spiritual growth. Being in a space where others are focused on worship and reflection, where leaders are guiding individuals to respond to God, created the conditions for him to hear the call and act on it. It's a reminder that sometimes faith develops in moments of intentional pause, surrounded by support, and through opportunities that encourage us to take a step forward, even when we're hesitant. Reflecting on his journey, the key themes are gratitude, faith, and the power of God to guide lives. Aiden went from uncertainty and hesitation to a deep, personal commitment, all through a combination of internal prompting and the supportive environment around him. His story shows that even when we're unsure, when our upbringing or circumstances are complicated, God can create moments that lead to clarity and transformation. It's a story of patience, listening to that inner nudge, and responding to faith when the opportunity arises. In the end, Aiden's testimony is about more than just one event at a retreat. It's about the way God works in our lives to guide, shape, and inspire. From his early experiences navigating a split household to the hesitation he felt at the altar, to the moment of transformation and acceptance of Jesus, his journey is full of suspense, emotion, and ultimate joy. And it serves as a reminder that faith is a personal journey filled with small nudges, moments of courage, and the guidance of God that can lead to a life of purpose, gratitude, and connection with Him. It's a story that's human, engaging, and ultimately uplifting, showing how God's work in our lives can be profound, even in ways we don't immediately see. Wow, what an incredible journey through all these stories. Each testimony reminds us of the power of faith, perseverance, and gratitude, even in the hardest moments. From miraculous healings to life-changing decisions, these stories show how hope and trust in God can guide us through anything. I hope hearing these stories inspires you to carry that same faith into your own life, to lean on your community, and to find courage in your challenges. If this touched you, consider liking and following for more stories like these.